Let's get you a very special voice who's joining us right now from New Delhi. Yes, that's correct. Hans-Paul Burkner, Global Chair at BCG, is here in our discussion. Hans, thanks very much for joining us here on ET Now. Good to see you here in New Delhi. How many times do you actually travel to India? I think now you'll be coming to India more often, given the fact that you're of the view that India is the center of global attention right now as far as big business and investments is concerned. Talk to us about what is really catching your attention in terms of the drivers of this economic growth, which you are so positive on here in India.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much. Coming to India for the last 30 years, and before the pandemic, I was here almost every month. So it's not that my interest has just come, but I have been interested in India, and I think the BCG has been interested in India for many, many years. Now, of course, we see India now with the largest population and also the fastest growing large economy in the world, attracting more interest. And that's certainly true. I've been in Mumbai, Bangalore, and now in Delhi. And there are many companies from Japan, Korea, from Europe, from North America, who are all very much interested in taking part in India's growth story. And there are lots and lots of state engaging with companies to attract FDI and also to sign a lot of MOUs, hopefully, which then translate into actual investments.
Hans, I want to understand from you, though everybody is really taking note of this and many companies are participating in this India growth as well, some are concerned that, are really questioning where the global growth is actually heading. And with that also, could that also cast some amount of pressure on India? What is the sustainable kind of growth which India can achieve if we take a slightly longer term horizon, say 3 to 5 years or beyond?
Yeah, well, we at BCG see India's growth at doing at 7 to 8% is absolutely doable. We have to be, of course, realistic about what is happening in the rest of the world. Europe will be at 1 to 2% GDP growth on average. The US probably around 3%. China could be, around 5%. Southeast Asia will be very interesting. The other big region with good growth of around 5%, maybe even more. And then Latin America and Africa being a bit more volatile and much more heterogeneous. But India certainly has the medium and long-term prospects are very good, and I think is a real chance of attracting a lot more investments in the coming years.
Hans, your good friend Ray Dalio also overnight made a very interesting tweet. I would like to get your thoughts on that. And he's a complete, a hedge fund manager, equities market person, and of course bond markets as well, saying that 7% on a structural basis in India is not ruled out. And in fact, he congratulates India on the Chandrayaan mission as well. And this has really caught attention of a lot of other fund managers and asset allocators across the world who up till now did not have India as a part of their specific strategy. Do you think, FDI, people in hardcore business across sectors understood India opportunity way back. But there is a new class of FIIs now who are taking India seriously. Because you in your circle, you have both categories of investors, actual businessmen as well as portfolio managers. You see India coming up the ranks in their list?
Absolutely. I think there is the largest population now. The world is in India with more than 1.4 billion. It will be growing. The standard of living will go up. There will be more consumption, so more opportunities for local production for the Indian consumers. But there will also be increasingly opportunities for exporting from India, and so I think really India has the potential, and I think we should also not underestimate that the friction between US and China will probably increase. And therefore, a lot of companies will worry about, how much to engage in China. And they will look also for new markets and new opportunities. And that will certainly play in the favor of India, in addition maybe to Southeast Asian countries where there's also a lot of interest.
Hans, you interact with global Fortune 500 companies. Many of them already have. In fact, if you just read the Economic Times front page of the last 1 year, almost every day there's a global CEO coming here and talking about scaling up their plans here in India. I have not seen in my 20s of being a business journalist this kind of an environment before. But you talk to them on a much more granular way, the India strategy. How much scale up are you witnessing, or even expansion of presence in India by companies who are up till now not there, but are household names in, say, Europe or rest of the world or even US?
Yeah. Well, I think, and indeed I had over the last few days quite a number of discussions, both with domestic companies, but also with foreign companies. And I think doubling, tripling, quadrupling over the next several years. I mean, if you look at what some companies, both domestic and foreign companies, have also achieved, I would say in the millennium, is, some of them have grown tenfold in 10 years. And, growth of 20% plus is absolutely doable. And that's what companies are looking for. And I think that's what also companies should be striving for if you really want to continue to have a strong position in India.
Mm-hmm. What are the challenges? Also, before that, I would like to, the current government is completing almost a decade in office, and we all know what lies ahead in the next year. I want to understand from you, because you get reflections from the company's beneficiaries and also who up till now couldn't latch on to the India growth and are looking at joining the bandwagon now, on how the reform work has been done in India so far. Because after all, business is getting a big boost on some structural reforms across sectors. Also, does it give you hope that if the leadership continues, the reform momentum, at least in India, would continue? And what are the areas you would like to see more work done?
Well, clearly, economic development and also the attraction for investors is human talent. So investing in health, in hygiene, in education, in training will be very important. I mean, clearly in Europe, in Japan, and many other parts of the world, we'll have a declining workforce. We have shortages of skills. So really developing the skill base will be enormously important. Yeah. And not just having large numbers of people, but also people who are really reasonably well educated and skilled. Technical skills are very, very important. Secondly, of course, infrastructure, both physical infrastructure, but also digital infrastructure is important. The financial markets need to be good. And then, of course, institutions. I think there needs to be further efforts to streamline rules, regulations, laws, to make sure that there's transparency of what you have to do and how you have to do it, and then to ensure that investment projects can go on stream within a very short period of time, 1.5, 2 years, and that it's very clear that if I commit as a foreign investor, I will get it done, and I will not run into obstacles which delay things and ultimately maybe even make my efforts futile.
Talk about some of the sectors where specifically you see very meaningful evidence of China plus one. We've been talking about it, and why only China? Now even Europe plus one. We are talking about friendshoring. Give us some feedback. See, traditionally it was manufacturing, even chemicals, but talk to us about sectors we should watch out for. Our audience is completely stock market related audience, and you can tell them which are the sectors on radar where you see friendshoring and China and Europe plus one actually gather momentum in their favor.
Good. First of all, I don't like China plus one or Europe plus one. It makes you look like you are an appendix to somebody else. And that certainly is, I would say, not acceptable. India has, enormous potential in its own right. And that's why the plus one is the wrong term in my view. I think what is really important is, the whole range, of course, tech, hardware, software, but also areas in manufacturing. And we always, of course, think, of automotive. We think of aerospace. That's certainly important sectors. But we forget that every car, every machine, consists of many, many different parts. There are switches. there are pumps, there are lots of things where mid-sized companies and small companies play a big role. So when we do think about attracting the big names, these big names need a real ecosystem. An ecosystem means many suppliers for mid-sized parts, for assembly, for testing, but also for some small parts which you may not even be aware of or don't even know the term. Nor do I don't know the term, and still it's very important. And I think that will have to be created. So it's not just sufficient to get one big factory of, let's say, Tesla or from Intel and so forth, or Foxconn. I think it's very important to make sure that in the whole neighborhood, in whatever state you are, there is a huge ecosystem with lots and lots of providers of different parts, different services, and so forth. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. That's why I would say it will lift up, almost all sectors, including, of course, consumer products will become more and more important. And I think there's also a huge opportunity for India through travel and tourism. I've been traveling with my wife through India a lot. We really like the country, but you find very few tourists. I think you find probably more Indian tourists now in Europe than you find European tourists in India. Probably not true, but it's something where the potential of the country is not at all fully explored. But not by far.
Indians are warming up to wanderlust, I must tell you, and tourism. And look at the hotel stocks in India, the way they've become multi-baggers. But I'll come back to you on a point. You work with Indian companies as well, very closely. In fact, smaller and smaller companies, I'm getting feedback, want to work with companies such as yours because they're aspiring to get in global standards of the way they're managing their companies in their enterprises. I want to understand the role of tier 2, tier 3. Now we are seeing increasingly billion-dollar companies arrive out of smaller towns in India. What kind of conversations are happening in boardrooms? What kind of feedback you get from your teams who work with, slightly mid-tier, but companies which have global aspirations across sectors?
Yeah, I must say the discussions with promoters in India and also CEOs, managing directors, chairpersons, whatever you like, are very refreshing. They are very ambitious people, both women and men. They have really bold visions for their companies, not just growing 5, 6, 7% as they may do in Europe, but growing 20%, 30%, and not just providing for Europe, but also expanding their reach internationally. In the Middle East, go to Europe, North America, but also other emerging markets. I think there's real excitement, there's real energy, and I think it's whereas in Europe, of course, people talk a lot about transformation, maybe also cost cutting, because growth, as I mentioned earlier, will be limited in Europe, surely because of the demographic developments. But in India, there is enormous energy, enormous ambition, and people really have high expectations, but they're also working very hard for it. It does not come by itself. And many of these companies, which maybe even 10 years ago nobody has heard of, will play a very big role in the coming years, not just in India, but across the world.
All right, Hans, one last question. I want to understand, everybody talks about the demographic dividend in India. No other country in this world have such a large proportion of the youth under 35, under 40. In fact, some of the regions in our country, some of the states in our country are as big as entire countries overseas. How do you see the durability and the longevity of this demographic dividend? Can it last some more decades?
Well, first of all, I think it's a demographic dividend if you have a good, well-educated and skilled a group of young people and workforce. So I think there is enormous investments to be done in continuously in education and in training overall at all levels. As we all know, Africa will probably be the continent with the largest population, and maybe by 2100 it will be 4 billion. But whether it will be really a demographic dividend or whether it will be a liability. That's something that we will have to see. And it depends really on whether we will be able, and India has made a lot of efforts, but still there's lots of room for improvement, to improve education, to improve training, and to really mobilize the whole generation of kids and young people.
Right.
I think it is sustainable for decades, but it needs also really consistent efforts. Again, as I said, lots of effort have been made, progress has been made. It's really fantastic what kind of talent we have all over the world from India. Actually, in BCG and around the world, we have more partners outside, Indian partners outside than inside. Even though, of course, we are here the largest consulting firm, and even though we are now more than